So whenever I talk to scientists about communication, I start kind of at the beginning of communication, which is Aristotle's On Rhetoric. And if you slog through Aristotle's On Rhetoric, if you had that honor as a communication student, it's all about audience. It's all about understanding who your audience is, what sort of information, what sort of messages they want to get from you, what's useful for them, what sort of frames are they coming to the conversation with so you can communicate with them effectively. And when we think about audiences for science communication, what I often see are plans, suggestions, ideas from scientists that focus on this idea of communicating with a general public or a mass public. And for modern communication campaigns, that is just not specific enough. We have to be a lot more specific when we think about effective science communication work. General audiences are a lot harder to come by than they used to be. Walter Cronkite could talk to a very general audience when there were three major news networks. Carl Sagan could reach a general audience when he did Cosmos. Nowadays, there's very few scientists who can do things that are so big that I would consider it a general audience kind of communication, right? So I think for most scientists, the sort of stuff they're doing, they're looking to connect with very specific parts of the public, right? It's not general audiences, it's specific audiences. And they need to think about not only who those audiences are, not only what sort of information they want to deliver to them, but also where those audiences get information. So when you start thinking about your audience, remember, who are they? Where are they getting information? And then finally, how can I get information to them through those information channels? Okay? The other thing that we have to recognize with science communication, any sort of communications campaign around science, is that there are multiple audiences, right? If you're a marketer, if you're somebody who's doing this from a business perspective, your audience might just be your customers, and that's all you have to worry about. For scientists, for science communicators, we have to think about a whole lot of different audiences, and I would argue that the first audience we have to think about are other scientists. And I would say when you're doing science communication work, it's really easy to forget that audience, right? You're focused on who you're going to get the message out to, and it's easy to forget, we really need to make sure that the scientific community would be okay with this message too. And a lot of times scientists are very, very concerned about their reputation within the scientific community, right? And that's not just from doing scientific papers and the pure scientific work that they do. Other scientists are also looking at your communications work. So I think whenever we're doing communications, we have to be cognizant that scientists are one of the audiences they'll be viewing and looking at whatever we're doing. We also need to think about funders, right? That's a really important audience in the scientific community. You have to think about stakeholders who might be using your science to inform work that they're doing. So if you're somebody who studies water quality, right, you might have multiple stakeholders. You might have a water manager, you might have somebody who cares about sanitation, you might have policymakers who are interested in that research, and you're also going to have people at home who want to know about their own water quality. You're going to have businesses who want to make sure that they're using high quality water. So all those stakeholders around you, those are people who could be getting your scientific information, and you have to think about, who are my priority audiences here. Now, talking about policymakers just for a second, a policymaker audience, they're going to be really specific too. They have a job to do. They might be legislators. They might be agency heads. They're a very specific audience. They're often getting information from you directly. I know a lot of scientists, a lot of researchers, how do I reach this particular policymaker, they might ask. And it might be as easy as calling up their office. Right? They have big staff very often, and they're able to hear from you. They often want good scientific information. They want local independent scientists whose expertise they can rely on. It can be that simple. There might be other ways that you wind up trying to get their attention too, through doing something like writing an op-ed or getting media coverage. But you can very often start with just a simple call, and that can be good too. When you're thinking about the journalist audience and the media audience, the thing I really wish more people who work with journalists and with the media would recognize is that journalists are doing a job, just like everybody else in society, really. So I never start conversations with the media should do X or journalists should do X. It's, I would like to help journalists do their job in a way that's consistent with accurate science communication. And if you're working with science beat journalists, that can be pretty easy. If you're working with journalists who are coming into a topic through a completely different framework, especially a controversial public policy topic, their sort of attitudes that they have about scientific research, it might be a little different than you're going to see from a scientific beat reporter who's steeped in this stuff every day. And I tend to think of the media and journalists as a specific audience that scientists should consider when they're doing science communication work, because you have to package information for journalists in a very specific way that's helpful for them for crafting their stories. And then that journalist might then convey that story to another audience you care about that you've already identified at the outset of your science communication activity. So I hope that's helpful. I hope it's useful to think through who all these specific audiences could be for your scientific research. And you have to do this work first because that's going to affect everything else that you're doing with your science communication plan. It's going to affect the messages that you shape, the take-home messages that you want people to have based on who that specific audience is and what their needs are. And it's also going to affect the sorts of work that you're going to prioritize, right? Because the other thing with science communication work is that our time, our resources, our ability to do the communications work is always limited. So you have to make priorities and you have to figure out which of those audiences are going to be the most important for you and for the specific communications work you want to take on.